Pardon me. Right, good afternoon, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on how to transition and maintain your ISO 27001 certification. Going to go over quite a few things. So this is really very relevant if you haven't transitioned at the moment to the new version of the standard, or if you're just trying to maintain or improve what you're doing at the moment. Because as we all know, and one of the key things about 27001 is that it's the continual improvement process. You know, you're meant to make it more effective and efficient over time, and that's one of the key requirements and key processes involved with the solution. So the transition period, or doing a transition, is actually a really good time for you to do a root and branch review of what your 27001 is doing, and is it meeting your requirements. But we'll go into that in more detail as we go through the presentation. Right, so one of the key things we will do as well, this should last about 45 minutes, and there should be then some time for questions. You've got the ability to type in questions, and at the end of the presentation I will try my very best to answer the questions you've asked. So who am I? Why am I talking to you about ISO 27001? So my name's Andrew Pattison. I'm the head of GRC consulting for IT Governance Europe, and I'm a governance risk and compliance specialist. I'm also a trainer, and I'm, for example, certified by ISACA to deliver CISM and C-risk courses. I deliver a load of courses on behalf of ITG as well. Things like lead auditor, lead implementer for 27001, NIS, NIS2, and the new regulation in the European Union called DORA, which is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. As you can see by there, I also published a book earlier this year about how you can implement DORA, and that's basically by using ISO 27001. And I'll remind you as we go through why you can actually use 27001 for things like DORA and NIS2. Worth pointing out that NIS2 is the new version of the NIS directive, which came out in 2018, and it covers a far larger area of sectors and across the European Union. And 27001 would be a really good way of you being able to make sure that you implementing that correctly and being able to prove that you are compliant with both NIS2 and DORA. So my background in 27001, as I always say to people, is I've been working with this standard so long, it wasn't actually an international standard when I started working with it, because it originates from BS 7799. So the first time I ever looked at a standard was with BS 7799, and at the time I was working for a police force in England, and we were looking to develop a national police information technology security policy, and this new standard had just appeared, and we went, right, we'll use that as a basis. Rather than writing a 400-page document, we said, right, you need to conform with the requirements of this standard. And as you can see there with my engagements, I work across Europe, Middle East, Asia, lots of different places like that, and I've worked in big petrochemical companies in Saudi Arabia. I'm currently on a very large project working in Morocco. Had to go there last week. Unfortunately, it was nice and warm and sunny, unlike where I live in Northern Ireland. And I've worked in legal, I've worked in construction. So I have a large area of expertise of working within ISO implementations across small to very big companies or organisations. Right, so who are we? IT governance. So IT governance, over 20 years of experience. We work globally. We've worked with more than 12,000 clients. I haven't worked with all of them. I've worked with a few in the last 6 years. And we work globally across all the 5 continents. Okay, and we are specialists in 27001 and governance, risk and compliance from a consultancy side. So that can be 22301, 9001, anything which relates to GRC. So that also includes things like the NIST cybersecurity framework, NIS2, NIS, and DORA, as I've already stated. So we've built up a very comprehensive knowledge, particularly in the 27001 space. As part of what we do as a business as well, we do an awful lot of training. So as I mentioned earlier on, I get involved with lead auditor and lead implementer training for 27001. And we're very keen, and we're sometimes a little bit different to other training deliveries in that sense. Everybody who delivers training has actually done it and done a lot of implementing, a lot of auditing. So we always focus on that practical experience and how to do things. So it's so when you get a training, it's from somebody who's done things, and it's basically when they're talking about stuff, it's from how they've learned over the years is the best way to implement or audit or whatever the course is about within the subject. So another little thing there which just shows you the sort of depth we've got. So we've had more than 1,300 projects to help organisations prepare and maintain their 27001 compliance. So that's, you know, sometimes that's a fresh implementation, or it's helping them transition, or it's helping them maintain, you know, scope increase, or whatever. There's lots of different reasons why we could be working with organisations. We could be doing their internal audits, all those sort of things. You know, over 15,000 training course delegates. Sometimes I feel like I've trained most of them, but I haven't. Cyber Essentials, which is a British requirement for working with public sector, etc., which is what they call a basic cyber hygiene certification. So we've done 7,000 of them, and actually some European companies do it as well because they need to work in the UK. And we've also got our governance tool called Cyber Comply, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And there's 2,350 organisations using that, and that's global. And if you look at the bottom of there, you can see, and very importantly, we have got ISO 27001 certification. I think quite important if you're talking to people about being ISO 27001 certification, that you actually certified yourself. And you can see all the organisations we work with there, and that's not all of them, but you know, very wide, and our place in the industry is very well known and very well respected. This is just a useful thing to say, but you know, from the Trustpilot and from responses from our customer base, that we have a Net Promoter Score of 63, which is, I'm not an expert on these things, but apparently that's very, very good. Okay, which is the main thing there. So that's just a little bit of background about who we are and where I come from. So what we're going to talk about here. So transition is a sort of thing that can fill people with great fear. Okay, I've got to transition my ISO 27001. Now, as somebody who has gone through the transitions from the British standard to 2005 version of the ISO standard, and then through the 2013 version, now going from 2005 to 2013 was a major change. Okay, this less so. But there's some things which have changed and some things which make more sense. So I've had experience of going through, this is my third transition. When you get as old as me, that's sort of things that you experience. And I keep trying to work out, will I go through another one or will I be retired by then? But I probably will have another one to go through. So we're going to go through a little bit about what's new in 27001. A little talk about 27006. That's just a nice bit of background information about what certification bodies need to do when they are certifying you. Okay, come in and do your audits. It gives them their guidance, their rules about auditing 27001. How ISO 27 affects organisations looking to start their implementation project. So, is there any differences? Where are we in the transition process? Has that affected things? Strategy for organisations upgrading, so the things you need to do. And although it is not super onerous, and if you've got a really well mature functioning ISMS, you should be able to do this within your stride. Might need a little bit of help, okay? But there are certain things that if you think you follow it in a systematic way, it makes things easier for you. Practical tips for planning and meeting the ISO 27001 deadline. Now, We'll talk about this, and the big date is the end of October next year, which sounds a very long way away, but it ain't. You know, you need to be planning now, because particularly if you leave it too late, you might not, you know, your certification body might not have availability to do the transition. So you need to understand that. Key thing, talk to your CB, you know, find out where they think you need to be in the process. And then we're going to talk about how our product Cyber Comply can be made, can help you with your 27001. If you're doing a new one, or you're doing, you've already got a mature one, the 27001 Cyber Comply, because it's about compliance tool. It's not just about risk. It's lots of things in there which just make your life a lot easier, and, you know, helps you becoming more effective and efficient. So what's new in ISO 27001 2022? And we'll talk a little bit about 27006 and how the changes affect your certification. Well, the key thing is that it will affect you. Okay, it's coming. It's a line in the sand. It's an immovable object. You need to transition by the end of October next year. Okay, so a little bit of the timeline. So ISO IEC 27001 was published on the 25th of October 2022. Now, one of the things we'll talk about later is the 27002 standard, which came out earlier in the year, and there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you that in a bit. The release has been much needed and highly anticipated. Any change in the 27001 standard, because it's so heavily used by people, even if they don't go for certification, they use it for guidance and all that sort of stuff. Because of the way the industry is changing from an information security point of view, it did need updating. Although it's always tried to be technology agnostic and quite almost vague in the way it describes things, giving complete flexibility for organisations. But it was last updated in 2013. So ISO standards are sort of meant to go through a 5-year refresh thing, and my math's not particularly good, but that's definitely more than 5 years. But I think it was good to get it right, and it's designed to be more reflect the way organisations think and behave, and some of the new areas, particularly from a technological side. Put my teeth back in, just to make sure that they are reflected. The basics approach of the standard hasn't really changed. There's a few tweaks, and we will go through that in a moment, actually on the next slide. So just remember, with the standard, 27001 has the clauses and it has an Annex A. Okay, now remember, the Annex A is not mandatory, the clauses are. And you think, why wouldn't the Annex A be mandatory? Because you really you can do it, but you only implement controls from Annex A where risk is identified. The reality is you do things for best practice, legal, regulatory requirements, and risk. So the Annex A controls are never designed to cover everything, but they're a really good place to do and start. And if you're not going to implement an Annex A control, you need to really give that consideration, because they're pretty good and pretty comprehensive in what they need to do. So as I say, we split it between clauses and the Annex A. So the clauses are the management system. It's the engine. It's what drives what you're going to do and how you're going to approach it. And there has been some changes in that. So I'm going to actually do a little bit of reading from slides here, just so we get that covered. So it identifies, so on context and scopes, identify the relevant requirements of interested parties and determine which will be addressed through the ISMS. Well, because ISO standards now have common clauses, you can have multiple standards in one management system. So if in that case, you need to define which of the requirements are related to the ISMS. The ISMS must now explicitly include processes needed and their interactions. It always talked about that, but it's got more specific about this. And this particularly relates to processes outside of your organization, but a part of your ISMS. So thinking about, so if you outsource something, you've still got to understand how that process interacts with your ISMS, and it needs to be controlled. Information security objects must now be monitored and made available as documented information. There's quite a few comments in there about made available as documented information, but it's gone explicit on there. There is new subclause on planning changes to the ISMS. So that is about, if you're going to change it, it needs to be planned. Doesn't say how you plan it. Now, that's going to be very different if you're in a really big organisation to a very small organisation. But key, support the requirements to define who will communicate the processes for effective communication have been replaced by a requirement on how to define. So not who, but how you do it. Again, a subtle change, but you need to think about that. The requirements to define, and then operation, establish criteria for process to implement actions identified in clause 6. So that's about risk. Organisation now required to control externally provided processes, products or services. Back to where we covered that a bit in the context, relevant to the ISMS rather than just processes. Okay, so in a sense there, that focus is more about relevant to the information security management system. Performance and evaluation, added emphasis that methods to monitor, measure and analyse and evaluate the effectiveness of the ISMS should produce comparable and reproducible results. Okay, so you look at one thing this year, you look at the next year, you're comparing apples with apples. It's very similar to what is required in the risk process. It's about comparable, reproducible, coming up with results and measurements which actually mean something to the organisation. And management review must consider changes and needs and expectations of interested parties. So in your management review, you put in another agenda item and make sure you cover that. Now, the reality is in the previous 2 agenda items in your management review, you'll have sort of covered that, but you need to do it explicitly. And as well as this, so the changes to the clauses are reasonably, feels quite light, hasn't rewritten them, there's the same sections. And there's another one here which has just come out where it's a slight change or update to, and this is across all ISO standards, is basically when you're thinking about interested parties to determine the context of the organisation, you need to take into consideration environmental issues, okay? Which you would probably be doing anyway, because if you think about it, when you take into consideration where your buildings are located, is there an environmental problem and all that sort of stuff. So you're probably already there on that if you're running well. And we have got a new version of the 27002, okay, which is where Annex A in 27001 gets its data, its information. And remember, 27001 Annex A says shall, 27002 says should. So 27001 Annex A is the specification. The 27002 document is guidance, information, and various things on that. So what's changed with Annex A, which is where it has done? So first of all, it's completely changed the organisation of the Annex A. So there's no longer 14 control areas, etc. Now, one thing just to note here is that it is now, the new version has 93 controls rather than the old one having 114 controls. Now, just to point this out, that sounds like there's less controls. Well, there isn't really, because what they've done, and I'll show you a little bit about this later, is they've merged a load of controls and then they've come up with 11. So if my maths is right, you can actually really think about this as there now being 125 controls. It's not less, okay? So quite a few of the controls in the old standard have been merged, but I'll show you what that is. So don't think about, oh, this is less for us to do, because it's got all the original controls in there, which some have been rewritten, merged, and some of them got multiple controls in there. But you've got these 11 new controls. Now, some of these you'll already be doing, and some of them you might have already been doing in a part of your ISMS already. But it's about threat intelligence. Will look very different in different organisations. Security for cloud services. Probably we're doing that already, but it's now explicit because cloud is so important. ICT readiness for business continuity. If you're doing business continuity, you need to be looking at 22301. But this is about making sure that ICT services are there to support what the business needs for business continuity. Physical security monitoring, okay? That's just a subtle update on certain things. The big ones which have probably changed a bit is, so configuration management, you'll have been doing that anyway, is around information deletion, data masking, data leak prevention. Those are quite big. Monitoring activities, web filtering, and secure coding. So you might already be talking about these, but I'll give you a tip on one thing, which go show you where it can change, and language is really important, is that when it comes to logging and logged information, it used to talk about you should review your logs. It now talks about in the control that you need to analyze logs. Now, if you think about it, review and analyze are quite, there's a slight difference of emphasis in those two words. Analyze is a lot more than review. So that's one of the key existing controls, which is actually being modified. So again, these sort of things are, you need to look at the language, you need to look at how the new controls are written, and you will find that there's some of them, there's no change, but some of them, there's some subtle changes in there. And that's one of the ones, or probably the major one, which has a biggest implication for an organization. So as I say, these, and again, instead of being in 14 areas, they're now organizational, technology, physical, and people. And again, to remember there, and that really focuses it, but only 34 of the controls are technical. Okay, this is, you know, technology is important, but as we say, you understand it, people, process, technology. Okay, technology is just part of the defense in depth approach to information security. Now, one of the, as I say, I mentioned it earlier on, that 27002 came out before 27001. That's because that's where Annex A in 27001 gets its information. And that document has increased hugely in size. And because what they've done is they've given additional information and they've come up with attributes. Now, for certification, in 27001, attributes are not required. Okay. But what attributes enable you to do is when you look at a control, it gives you a way of describing it, which I think helps business or the organization understand what this control is doing. So, for example, you talk about whether it's a preventative, detective, or corrective control, whether it deals with confidentiality, integrity, availability. Does it identify, protect, detect, respond, recover? Is it governance, asset management, etc.? There's a few more on those. And what domain does it work? So what it enables you to do is you can sit there and go, which controls have I got in here dealing with confidentiality? Which controls are about asset management? Which controls are about governance and the ecosystem? So when it says governance and the ecosystem, that's the management system and how it all operates. But what it means is that you can sit there and define controls in a way that might speak better to the organization. It also nicely links in to the NIST cybersecurity framework, which also maps to 27001 and talks in the language of identify, protect, detect, respond, recovery. So it shows a little bit of the American system talking to the International Standards Organization, and it gives that sort of like the jargon is more similar and less confusion. So it's very well worth. And if you're implementing 27001, you have to get a copy of 27002 because it's just full of so much rich information to make. If you don't understand what a control is or how it might look, 27002 will give you that information. Most auditors will sit there and they go and see 27002 because you can't be an expert on everything. Although, just to point out, they don't audit against 27002. Now, another thing that 27002 does, which makes life a lot easier for you, is it has these two tables. B1 I'm going to talk about first, and B2. And basically what it does is it tells you what the new control sets is and how it relates to the other one. So if you see there, first of all, 5.1 in the new organizational part of the standard in Annex A, it relates to 5.1.1 and 5.1.2. So as I say there, 5.1 is two merged controls from the original 2013 version. And then you go down along and you'll see that threat intelligence is new, but it shows you how it links. Okay, really useful. It makes it makes it a lot more straightforward for you, because you can see that actually, no, we've got those controls covered. Again, in table B2, it talks about how, again, how things link. So it goes 5, which is the control, 5.1 is the subcontrol, and then it says 5.11 and 5.12 relate to 5.1. It's just another way of presenting that information. But those two tables, table B1 and B2 in 27002, are really, really useful. I have used them a lot, and I'm still using them a lot, because it's to make sure that I don't miss anything. Now, we'll just have a little mention about 27006. So 27006 is where auditors go to look at about how they implement or how they audit against a 27001. So again, it sets out the requirements for certification bodies. We call them CABs or CBs. We could sort of interchangeable terms, but in the standards and the all those sort of formal documents, they're called CABs, CABs. And it just sort of like, it specified some additional guidance, some slight changes to how they should be looking at auditing. And it's, you know, you probably don't need to go and read it unless you're having problems sleeping, and you go and try and read 27006, you'll get to about page 3, and I don't care how difficult you find sleeping, it will not be a problem after that. So there's a couple of things which, how might that impact how you're going to deal with things. So it specifies that organisations must integrate all aspects of the updated 27001-22 into their ISMS for audit readiness. So you have to do all aspects of 27001. There's stuff about inclusion of remote auditing techniques allows for more flexible audit planning, but requires thorough preparation to ensure accessibility for auditors. So it formally talks about how we can do remote, because if you think about it, remote auditing wasn't something we really did pre-2020, and the world changed, and it's sort of like formalising ways organisations can deal with remote auditing, which of course, if you've got an ISMS, we've all got quite familiar with it, being audited remotely and auditing remotely. Not quite the same as being in the same room, but more than adequate if you prepare properly. And it does probably need a little bit more preparation and thought, both from the auditee and the auditor. Organisations must show ongoing enhancement of their ISMS and expect more stringent evaluation during certification due to enhanced auditor competence. So it's just sharpening their pencil, making sure they've got everything covered correctly. So how is ISO 27 affects organisations? We can start there. Implementation product. Well, first thing, you can't get certified against 27001 2013 anymore. That ended in April, the last day of April this year. So that's a key thing. Transition must be completed by the 31st of October 2025. So if you are certified against 2013, and it was 2 months ago, you don't have the 3 years. You have to transition by the end of October. Annex A controls are not mandatory. Mentioned that earlier on. It is a referent control set, almost. You only need to adopt the new controls if you have a risk for which they are appropriate. So again, you know, controls only need to be implemented if there's a risk, but you'll always look at, is there a best practice, contractual, legal, regulatory, does a client ask you to do it, all those sort of things. At the very least, you need to adapt your statement of applicability. So there's a couple of things, and we'll talk about that. So you're going to need a new statement of applicability linking your risks and your controls for your new certification. That's one of the key things. That is if you haven't got that, you're not going to get to do your transition. So organisations already certified. So 3-year transition period for certified organisations to revise their management system to conform to the new version of 27001. So there was a 3-year period for this to happen. October 2025, you have to transition. You might need to transition earlier, or so if you've got a recertification audit coming up, you know, you decide whether you're going to transition at that point. You might decide that you have a special audit where you transition before. This is all going to be down to how you feel where you think you are in the roadmap. They're going to want to see a gap analysis. That's one of the requirements. Make sure that your documentation meets all the gaps, all the requirements of the standard. If your certification is due for renewal during the transition period, it would be sensible to transition in advance. Yeah, so there's two ways of looking at it. Do I do a full wait till my certification expires? If it's before 2025 and just move at that point, you might decide to do it before. Again, it's going to be down to timescales. But if you haven't started planning your transition now, you really need to get onto it, because it doesn't sound a long way away. It sounds a long way away at the moment, but it only seems like 2 minutes ago that they brought out the new standard, and we're already into the last part of it. Make sure that, and one of the things you can do, and this is a key thing when you're implementing these new controls, the most sensible thing is to use this as an opportunity to sit there and go, what else do I need to look at? You know, this could be a real good opportunity to make sure that you're getting more effective and more efficient over time. So as I say, key 3 things to hear. You can't certify against 27001 2013 anymore. If someone's offering you that, you need to think about what sort of certification body they are. Are they accredited? If they're not accredited, that's a whole different conversation. All transitions must be completed by the end of October 2025. Don't leave it to the last month. Yeah, plan it now, and say don't leave it too late. Yeah, that is the key thing, because your 27001 certification is valid to the end of October, if that's within your timelines next year. But after that, it doesn't exist. And that's another thing just to keep an eye on. After that date, if someone says it's 27001 2013 certification they have, it's not a valid certification. Right. So strategy. So we talked about the clauses there. Talked about that earlier on. So it's a similar approach. If you're implementing or anything, the clauses are the engine of the system. So you've got, you know, the first set of clauses up to 3 are just background information. 4 is about context. Leadership is 5. 6 is about planning, where you do your risk. 7 is about support. 8 is about operation. 9 is about analysing and evaluating your ISMS. And 10 is about continual improvement, and it's where we talk about audit. Remember, the audit thing is very important. You know, before you go for your recertification, get an internal audit done. Yeah, at the minimum clause covering the areas that have changed, but also I always say with any internal audit, because remember, you don't have to audit everything every time. You need to audit everything within the 3 years, but always making sure that your clauses are being audited is real best practice. Keeps you focused on things, definitely. So that's all pretty similar. There's no major changes, just those few tweaks we talked about earlier on. So, and again, whether you're transitioning or it's a new thing, management commitment. If you've got leadership, if you've got commitment from management, you can accomplish anything. If you haven't, it's going to be time consuming and quite difficult. Do a gap analysis. What have you got to do to get to where you need to? If you've got other standards on there, think about how that might affect your transition, particularly because some of them won't have been updated yet, so you need to keep working the way you are. Communication plans, understanding any updates in skills. If you've got certification in training, do you need to update any of that? Good point, and you need to review your risks, because you need to link them to the new controls. Get the team involved, get the risk owners involved. Deploy your amended procedures and processes to reflect the new changes. And the on round of internal audits. Really, really useful. That is one of the key benefits of bringing an external like us to come and do your internal audits. You know, it's always a problem if you're marking your own homework. So, risk assessments, transition. Review your risk assessments. You've got to link them to your your statement of applicability to the new control sets. Okay. You may find that you're bringing up new new risks. We're constantly seeing new things today. We've just seen the news today that a payroll being exposed by a hostile third-party foreign actor. They're not saying who it is. The MOD. Thinking about particularly your third parties. Okay, outsourced, where you get things. This is the new thing that people are focusing. You look at NIS2, DORA, all these new requirements coming through. It's all about third parties, understanding your supply chain and the risks there. And go through the standard approach you would to doing your ISMS risk. You've got a methodology, you follow it, you understand what assets you have, not just physical, information, non-tangibles, threats and vulnerabilities, understanding what it is. And actually, and you can do scenario-based risks, where you describe a story, which is a better way sometimes of talking to the business, making them appreciate what you're actually doing. And you evaluate and review. So remember, your risks is always going to be, it's a journey, not a destination. You never get to the end of it. Strategies for securing senior management. Communication is one of the key things. Making sure they understand what is the issue is if you're no longer compliant. Particular interesting one is if you're an organisation who's been certified and you lose certification, that never looks good. Make sure that they understand that senior management have to lead by example, drive the certification or the implementation of your ISMS. Really, really important that area. So, what should the project deliver? Compliance with the mandatory requirements of ISO 27001:2022. Compliance with applicable legal, regulatory and contractual security related obligations. Compliance with the policies and procedures for the ISMS. And this is a key thing, is that just remember that when you're being certified, it's against the requirements of the standard, but also what's very important is that you can build in through the context, legal, regulatory compliance, through your risk assessments, you can build into it other requirements. That's why I've thought about you can use it for NIS2 and DORA, because it gives you that structure. Okay, contractual, legal and regulatory. Interested parties, you make it do what you need it to do. So no, compliance means consistent and full compliance. Controls applied at all of the time, everywhere in scope and working effectively and efficiently and delivering what's they're meant to be doing. It also means continual improvement. I mentioned that already. The idea is you're continually improving, you're developing, becoming more effective and more efficient, which is important because then it really works for the business. Internal audits, management reviews, external auditors. So internal audits, it's where you are checking whether an audit department or external auditors, seeing how you're doing. Are you meeting the requirements of the standard? Are you meeting the requirements of the system? Management reviews is about you sit down at least annually with senior management and go through, this is what we're doing. There is a set agenda of things you need to do and cover that. So it's making sure risks are being done, what you're doing about continual improvement, what you're doing about measurements. It's all the things which it shows that you're managing your system. And then external auditors. You have to get recertified every 3 years, but you'll have surveillance audits through that process. Okay, really, really important, really, really useful. You can then look at the best practice. Okay, so secure senior management support. What do you need to do for that? The advantages. Develop a project plan. It's like anything you'd be implementing. You need to follow a plan. Okay. Understand what your gaps are, both the ISMS and the Annex A controls. Engage, communications, bring people along on the journey. Don't just shock them at the end of the year, you've done a load of work, and they go, what's this? Grip B, new policies and procedures. Make sure they've done awareness training. Those policies and procedures need to follow a process that they're published, signed off, reviewed, any changes, documented, what version it is. Your risk management, that process which drives what Annex A controls you're going to do. What are you going to do to address the risks from an information security problem for business? And then continual improvement. The idea that you are constantly trying to make things better. Okay. it's not a, if ISO 27001 doesn't make you a better business, it's a problem, but it should make you a better business, okay? Because you're dealing with all these information security risks and making it less likely that you're going to have something happen. You can't completely remove it, but you can make things less likely. Now, a key thing, and we've already mentioned this, is that information security management 27001 isn't just about technology. It's about people, process, technology. So it's about awareness. It's having good processes in place. You know, people implement the processes to enable the technology. Don't focus on the technology side. And if you look at the controls, you can see that a third of them, just under a third, are, or just over a third, about technology. The other stuff is about people and process. And that's a very, very key point. And you think about from the clauses, it's awareness, you know, roles and responsibilities. And the thing we're trying to protect and talk about, as we talk about, and we're doing this in risk, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, CIA. Okay. And what you're trying to do is defense in depth. Okay, so you're treating risks with certain controls. They're not all technology, they're not all process, they're not all people, but you've got a combination. And this is all part of this thing and this strategy about how you identify things, how you protect things, how you detect things going wrong, how you then respond, and how you then recover. So you're talking about business continuity, incident management, risk identification, all these holistic things to move you forward. Okay, and they're not isolated. So think about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, people, process, technology. Okay. Now, the one thing we know is that we're in an environment where regulation and requirements from both state and companies is not getting less. Okay, we have data protection, we have NIST, we have the operational resilience requirements for financial services, okay? And even though we're no longer in the European Union, anything that's going on there, that can affect organisations supplying into the EU from the UK. So all those things going on mean that you have a lot of stuff to manage. So how do you do it? Well, there's applications out there. Our application for doing this is Cyber Comply. Now, that graphic on the left shows you all the systems, all the standards, all the frameworks that you can manage through Cyber Comply. If you get your magnifying glass out or you have a look at it later and zoom in, you can see it talks about global ones, it talks about UK ones, and the whole sector that is European, okay? And those European ones are getting quite interesting by the way they're extending across multiple sectors, particularly NIST 2, okay? And if you look at the core, what NIST 2 wants you to do, 27001 is a real big ally in it. And that's all the things there, you know, that you can do and manage through Cyber Comply. We're building into it and releasing very shortly an audit module. So you can make, you can evidence and run your audits through the module. So it's ISO 27001 document generation. So we have within there lots and lots of toolkits as well as 27001. We have DORA toolkits, we have NIST toolkits, we have all these different toolkits which give you templates to develop the policies and procedures you need. It can do your GDPR integration, okay? So it can do data flow mapping, it can do all those different things about the GDPR. It enables that easily from your risk to produce a statement of applicability for 27001. Instant tracking and collaboration. It can do it where you've got stakeholder notification and comprehensive incident logging. You can do things, you can set up tasks for people to do stuff. So you need to go and do this as part of our ISMS now, and you can log it's been done and you can link it to various things. So it's a very comprehensive, very flexible system just to make this increased and complicated compliance environment we live in a lot more straightforward. There's some details there on the differences in the packages we have and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to go through that now. You can look at that later. But there's a package and requirements and a solution to fit any size of business and any level of complexity. Used very widely, a lot of customers. I'll let you read those reviews later. But as we mentioned earlier, I think it's over 3,000 organisations are using this globally as a tool, and it just makes things a lot easier. On your risk assessments, it will save you a ton of time, not just when you initially do them, but when you need to come and review them, when you need to produce treatment plans, when you need to show that it's related to your statement of applicability. It's all automated, saves you a lot of time, repeating processes, etc. So as you can see, there's some pretty big organizations using that already. So there's a link to go and look at Cyber Comply. You can go and get demos on it. You can get evaluations on it. So you can run it for a while, see how it works. If you're more interested in that, we're always running, I think, a weekly Cyber Comply webinar with the Cyber Comply experts running and showing people what that can do for them. So how can IT governance help your organization? Well, we can do consultancy, we can do auditing. From a consultancy point of view, we can come in and do most of it for you. You're always going to have to do some work, okay? Because it's your management system. You have to have ownership there. So we can do it where we do the vast majority, where we lead it all, to ones where we can come in and we can do a few days, get a lot of help, just give you guidance into it. And we can do managed services. We can do auditing, do your internal auditing for you. That is a big help when you come into your recertification or your surveillance audits, because you know that you're getting the audits done to a level that the auditors, your certification body auditors, know that you're doing that. I had one recently where I worked on a project where at stage 1, they reduced their stage 2, the CB, by 3 days because they knew the customer had been working with us and they knew what they were expecting, from the internal audits, from the documentation, that they were able to reduce their stage 2 audit. So it's not just that what we do. We do internal training. We can do certification, so 27001, implementer, auditor, internal auditor. We do really good and comprehensive computer-based training for your staff, which will enable you to show that for your auditors that they have gone through training. And we do plethoras of those sort of things. You can get standards. We'll supply you standards. I mean, there's thousands of them, but definitely 27001 and 27002, which you definitely need, okay, to understand what you've got to do for the new requirements. And we have the main product there we do is Fast Track 27001, which will come in as well with our Cyber Comply tool and streamline the implementation of your ISMS so that you can get to the point where you're going to get certified because it fits with what you're doing and it can show benefits for your organization. So we can do all of those sort of things. Look at our website, we do a huge amount of training, lots of other things, well as ISO, GDPR, DORA, NIST, all these other things which might be in your to-do list as an organization. Right, so that's me and my slides. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, can you please put them up now? And I'll endeavour try my best to answer your questions. If not, we will come back with, we'll contact you and give you a response to the questions. So if you've got questions, start typing now. I'm going to take a bit of coffee while I'm waiting for that, in case anybody has a question. Right, what aspects of the new controls will the auditors drill down on the most? That's a good question. It's early stages yet still, so they're sort of like they're finding their way as much as everybody else is. Okay, I think the ones where they will definitely be interested in the new controls. Okay, So those new 11 controls, they'll definitely be looking at those. Particularly some of them you might not or might have been doing them before, but they want to see if you're meeting the requirements of the standard. I think they'll definitely look at the logging one, where how can you show that previously you were reviewing and now you're analysing? You know, and if you think about that, analysing, you might have a tool doing it, but how do you analyse? What are you doing about threat intelligence? Because that's quite a new one, as I said. Now, you could have argued that you maybe did that with contact with special interest groups and things like that, and the authorities could get some threat intelligence, but it depends how big and how complex you are. I think they will be, so one of the controls which they'll definitely look at is 5.1 talks about policies, topic-specific policies, and acknowledgement that you've actually seen them, people have seen them. So it's no case you've distributed it. You have to have people acknowledging they've seen policies. So how do you do that? So that's, if you decided you're going to do that by people have to sign a piece of paper, they want to see the signed piece of paper. You might be able to do that electronically. So they'll need to look at that. So that's so I would say from the original stuff, it's the acknowledgement and analysing, and then in the new controls. Okay, for lead implementer certification, what is PCB and how to identify which one is best? Does each body have different standards? I don't think I can really comment on anybody else's certification for training delivery, but you know, we have to follow. You need to check that they're certified for doing training. Okay, so we're certified, and there's lots of things about what makes sure that. Still on the 27001 training now. I might be out of date on this, but I still think that we're probably do more 27001 training courses than anybody else globally. And over the years we've been doing it, we've implemented or given more certificates out on that. But I don't think I could really comment about other people's training. Are there any books you would recommend for focus on the new controls for a small business looking for improvement, implementing 27001 for the first time? Yeah, there's lots of books. Now there's one, and I'll just read over to here, which I think this has just come out, and it's on we're publishing house. So that's the older version, ISO 27001 controls, by this lady who sits on the 27002 working panel, the ISO, has brought out a new version of this book for the new version of 27001, sorry, and it's brilliant because it talks about what you've got to specifically look about, and it's about auditing controls, implementing and auditing, and it gives you some really good insight. That's very good. We've got, go and look on our website, and there's quite a few other books on there. You know, I've just got, can I see the original? There's quite a good one. There's a very good one by our CEO Alan Calder on there, worth getting. But that ISO 27000 controls, I've used that since that came out, and I edited it. So I even reference a book that I edited. So it's because there's so many, you have to go and look sometimes, and it's a really good read. What is the main change in the comparison of the clause 4 to 10 from the old standard? It's not main changes. When it went from 2005 to 2013, they rewrote the clauses. If you look on the slide, which is near the beginning, it just tells you a few things. So it's about making sure that you are things that are relevant to the ISMS. It focuses more on making sure all relevant processes are controlled. Okay, and there's a little bit more in the measurement and monitoring, and objectives have to be more well defined. But clauses, generally, there's not a lot of change in there. It's mainly in the Annex A. What is the best way to map existing risk assessment table to the new controls? Best way is use CyberComply. Yeah, the best way for you to do that is to get 27002 and look at the Annex, the table B1 to B2, because that will show you how they link. If you try and do it by looking at the standards, you're just going to find that really, really difficult. So using either get CyberComply, which will do it automatically for you, you just press a button, or get those two tables, and that will tell you how they link. Okay, So that would be time consuming, but that's the easiest way of doing it. Okay, and I think that's all the questions. Hopefully I answered them. If there's any time for a couple of more questions, if anybody's got, what would you say is the best way to satisfy 8.34, protection of information system during audit from the policy, procedure and evidence perspective? Right, so 8.34, right, that's an old one. That's in the original standard. So let me think about this. So what has that been replaced? Oh, 834, sorry, I've just read that. Right, so protection of information system during audit. So that's basically the sort of thing that when you're doing an audit, that you're not impacting anything. Because an audit isn't about going, you know, I'll give you an example. When you're auditing this disaster recovery plans, for example, in there, you don't go and pull a plug out the back of a system to see if their DR works. You know, that's not auditing. That's breaking stuff. So that sort of thing. So I suppose it depends what context is, but the thing you're focusing on there on 8.34 is, you know, but when you audit, you don't impact things. So the classic thing is if you were auditing, you know, and you had an incident going on, you'd stop the audit. You know, so it's, you know, it really depends what they're doing. You know, you don't interfere with systems. Yeah, you don't change things. You're observing. Okay. Yeah, risk. So risk. Okay, so when you're talking about criteria, you're talking about impact and likelihood. Totally, an organisation's what an impact is going to be unique to an organisation. What the likelihood is. So if you are a financial exchange, with likelihood, you might be looking at things as short as happens every minute. That could be one of your measurements. Doesn't make sense for other types of organisations. So your impact criteria and likelihood are down to you. But the key thing is they're understood, so you want to document them, and you consistently use them. Okay. The consistency, so you're not changing your impact and likelihood all the time. You know, you come up with an impact and likelihood, and everybody knows what that is. So when you look at a risk and come back later and look at it again, your impact and likelihood makes sense, and you use the same things. So yes, it's a very personal thing to an organisation. You know, it's a sort of thing that we as a consultancy can help you come up with an idea. But it's what the impact of your business or your organisation can be very different to the impact of other organisations and other businesses. Any more questions? What is the minimum requirement from an internal audit prior to the main audit? Right, okay then. Well, this is an interesting one. If it's before stage 1, stage 2, it's a bit vague on that, but I would say a full system audit before stage 2. Okay, that's when you're going for certification. You'd probably want to do that before your stage 1 audit. The rest of it, so you've got certified, you then into your 3-year certification process, is that you audit the system over the 3 years. Okay, so everything has to be audited at least once. I would, when I'm doing it, so you're auditing every year, I'd audit the clauses in their entirety every year, because that's the engine. But this isn't a minimum requirement. You don't have to do that particularly. And I'd audit a selection of the controls, but you need to make sure within that 3-year period, every part of the clauses and every part of the Annex A implementation has been audited. Okay. And, you know, but again, you might audit things more regularly because there's higher risk or more important to the organization. The lead implementer is, let me get this right, it is, I believe, 4. We do a foundation course, which is 1, and then we do the lead implementer, which is 4. Lead auditor is 5 days. Yes, you spend 5 days talking about audit. But they're both really, really good courses, you know, and worth doing. And actually, sometimes if you're implementing, understanding what the auditor's looking for is also really useful. Okay, we're coming up to 4 o'clock. thank you very much for all those questions, some really useful questions in there, and hopefully I've given you answers, and hopefully, what are the three most important evidence to solidify your 2020 audit preparedness? Good question. I'll just quickly answer that. I think it's to make sure you've got your policies and procedures in place, you've got documented evidence, okay, and you have evidence of if you're doing things. So if you've done a test on your business continuity plan, you have to have a test, evidence that it's been tested, okay? Acceptance of policies, all those sort of things are very, very important. But you'll drive evidence, and so continual improvement log, internal audit information, measurement. So lots of things are important. To say which are the three priorities, the priorities are probably the ones you haven't got, okay, because they're all sort of equal in that sort of thing, you know. Management review, you know, actions from that, showing that you can prove that you've done that. Okay, then we're now at 4 o'clock, or minute over. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for the questions, and good luck, and you know where we are if you need any help.